Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, May 28th, 2015. We're several years beyond Thunderdome now, folks, but the Nefarium is still busy, and I want to talk about a couple of articles. Hopefully, I'll be able to get through what I want to say and then maybe make a short announcement. But I want to get to the articles because I had several people send me two different articles, and as I read both of them, I discovered that they were connected in a very, very interesting way. So the first article is titled Putin, and this is from the BRICS website, incidentally. Putin to meet BRICS national security advisors in Moscow. Now listen carefully. Ahead of the 7th BRICS summit in the Russian city of Ufa, Putin will discuss security cooperation with the national security advisors of China, India, South Africa, and Brazil. The Russian National Security Advisor and Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, is hosting the delegates from the 5 BRICS countries. The Chinese and Indian delegations are headed by State Councilor Yang Jiechi and Indian NSA National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, signaling that the BRICS are no longer a purely economic bloc, given the kind of similar interests that the 5 nations have as emerging economies. The national security issues are also on the agenda of the BRICS talks. The security officials will discuss important regional and global developments during the Moscow meet, which includes the threat emanating from the rise of ISIL and Boko Haram in West Asia and North Africa. Meanwhile, I'm skipping down now in the article. Meanwhile, on Monday, Russian and Chinese national security advisors Nikolai Patrushev and Yang Jiechi held a meeting on Monday during which they spoke out against unilateral sanctions and attempts to interfere in countries' internal affairs, the Security Council said. And I want you to pay attention to that one. I think this is a clue to what's happening here, and it has huge significance. And then the final paragraph from this article I want to read to you. Interference, and this is incidentally apparently the Russian Security Council issuing a press statement, quote, interference in the internal affairs of countries and the imposition of our own will is unacceptable. We express our opposition to attempts to shift power from the outside and the imposition of unilateral sanctions on the basis of national legislation of individual countries, unquote. Now, clearly that last statement is a direct slap against Washington, D.C., and the attempts to manipulate Russian politics from the outside and through so-called, and please note the phrase, non-governmental organizations. Now, that brings us to the next article that people also sent me this last week. And I'm only going to read the initial 3 or 4 paragraphs in this article. But there's something going on here. This is from the UK's Guardian, incidentally, and the title of the article is Russia Bans Undesirable International Organizations Ahead of 2016 Elections. And then the first 3 paragraphs, quote, Russia's parliament has passed a law banning undesirable international organizations, raising fears pardon me, of a further crackdown on voices critical of the Kremlin. According to the legislation, the Prosecutor General and the Foreign Ministry can register as undesirable any foreign or international organization that presents a threat to the defensive capabilities or security of the state, to the public order, or to the health of the population. Blacklisted groups will be forbidden from operating branches or distributing information in Russia, and banks will have to notify the Prosecutor General and Justice Ministry of any financial transfers involving them. Although the language of the threat posed was vague, the bill's authors suggested that international NGOs often work in the interests of foreign intelligence agencies. So in other words, What Russia is doing is it's going to outlaw those non-governmental organizations that have been used, as they were used inside the Ukraine and elsewhere, to drive internal revolutions, affecting changes of power and bringing in pro-Western and pro-American puppet governments. And what Russia's doing is forestalling the use of the same technique in Russia itself. But now go back to that first article and how that article ended about the Russian National Security Advisor, State Security Council, saying interference in the internal affairs of countries and the imposition of our own will is unacceptable. We express our opposition to attempts to shift power from the outside and the imposition of unilateral sanctions on the basis of national legislation of individual countries. All right. So in other words, this is a direct slap, not only at the United States imposing through its Congress sanctions on Russia. All right. So in other words, what Russia is saying is by passing a sanction bill, the Congress has in fact stepped outside of its jurisdiction because it's trying to legislate for the economy of Russia and enforce that will on everybody else. And incidentally, I think they have a point here. So in other words, they're taking issue at the entire American structuring of the unipolar world. All right. Now, the NGO issue here, I think, is very important in conjunction with this joint BRICS summit, because I suspect that what you're going to see the BRICS nations do, particularly China, but I think you're going to see this happen in Brazil, I think you're going to see this happen in India, and I think you're going to see it happen in South Africa. Pardon me, there's going to be some sort of crackdown on non-governmental organizations, and particularly any non-governmental organization that appears to have ties to the United States and that has any sort of track record of interference in the internal political domestic affairs of their own governments, or for that matter, instituting any form of internal dissension through their supply of money and so on and so forth. So in other words, the BRICS nations, I think you're going to see, are going to start coming out with policy statements about non-governmental organizations calling for, and please note, calling for either worldwide or UN sanctions or statements or regulations about what is proper and improper action. Now, why do I bring the UN into this? Because a lot of you send me articles all the time. I very, very seldom comment about the UN and its activities. I'm certainly not a globalist. I have never liked the idea of the UN, to be quite frank. But many of you have sent me over the past year or so these articles concerning the UN Agenda 21 and the idea of sustainability. And many of you have pointed out that even there, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, appear to be driving this agenda for inside the United States. So in other words, these organizations can also operate inside the United States and do so in ways that are inimical to the national interest and possibly even to the national security. Now, my point here that I'm driving to is what the BRICS nations may be onto, and what I'm going to suggest is that NGOs may not simply, and please hear me now, this is my high-octane speculation of the day, that these non-governmental organizations may not simply represent American tools of covert operations and false flag events and so on. They may also represent someone else's tools. And please note, if they are behind the UN and attempting to work inside the United States and cause all of this chaos, we have to admit the possibility that these NGOs might not be connected to any territorial sovereign government on the planet, and would rather, therefore, represent perhaps an independent international corporate entity. So in other words, the BRICS nations may be taking stock of something that's not yet on the Western radar screen. This is my real point. And I think in doing so, we have to hold open all possibilities. Could these NGOs be acting as shills for something like what I've been calling the Nazi International? Maybe. May they be acting as shills for multinational corporate interests that are acting on their own? Maybe. But I think we're going to see something like this start to come out of the BRICS nations as a result of this concentration, particularly inside Russia now with this legislation directed precisely at NGOs. We're going to start seeing the BRICS formulate a common policy. And that policy, this is what I'm really suggesting, that policy is going to suggest what they suspect is really behind all of these NGOs. And I'm willing to bet, just sort of bet my bottom dollar, that we're going to see their regulatory policies or recommendations reflecting their assessment that NGOs are not simply an American tool of covert activity and operations. I think we're going to see these things reflect their assessment that these are also perhaps acting in behalf of genuinely internationalist groups, all right, independent internationalists, extraterritorial, if you will, sort of groups. So this is something to watch, folks. I realize that's high octane speculation, but I want to put it out there because I think this is something that we have to watch over the next year or so. Now, I did finish in time to make a quick announcement. I am finishing up with the new book. I have been waiting for the past couple of days on some more information that is necessary for me to complete a very, very controversial chapter. So once I get that, the book should be finished here within, I would say, the next week to week and a half. I will let everybody know. And I want to thank you all for your donations, your continued prayers. They are truly appreciated. It's been a very rough 2 months. And I will see you all on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.